Hello everyone and welcome to our 360-degree video production webinar, Secrets of Success, brought to you by theta360.com. I think you're maybe seeing the theta360.com website, or maybe you've got just the basic intro screen. I'm Jesse Kasman, today's monitor, theta360.guide. I think I said .com just now. Theta360.guide is an independent and free informational site for developers and power users working with the Ricoh Theta 360-degree camera. I have just a few housekeeping items before I introduce today's speaker. This webinar will have an interactive Q&A section at the end. You can just type in a question into the question window at any point. I think it's on the upper right. Any point during the presentation and click the submit button. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as time will allow. Also, 5 participants who are with us at the end will be selected randomly to receive a free e-copy of Michael's book, The 360-Degree Video Handbook. We'll look at the list of attendees and use the Google random number generator to pick winners. I don't think we're going to do it during the webinar, so we will contact you by the end of the day with that you're a winner, if you are a winner, and with the link to download the ebook. So now to introduce Michael Wohl. Michael is an award-winning filmmaker with over 15 years of experience writing, directing, and editing independent films. He worked at Apple, working on Final Cut Pro. He taught at UCLA's School of Film and Television. It's presented at film festivals like Sundance and South by Southwest and quite a few others. His recent book, The 360-Degree Video Handbook, the thing that we're giving away at the end of the webinar, brings the professional video producer's perspective to 360-degree video. Okay, Michael, so I'm going to hand over presentation to you. Take it away. Let's see. All right, we should be.
There it is.
Moving over to your screen.
Oops, but I lost my.
Yep, I see your desktop.
All right.
Looks like a beautiful sunset, only in 2D though.
Well, thank you guys for joining us for this. This should be a fun little session. Excuse me. I've got a bunch of fun things to talk about, but I do want to encourage you to ask some questions along the way, and Craig will keep track of those, or Jesse, sorry, will keep track of those, and we will try to answer as many of those as possible at the end. As he mentioned, I have just recently completed, well, so the GoToMeeting thing is in the way there. This is the book I just finished writing, or a few months ago, the 360 Video Handbook, and this was the culmination of several years of investigation into this field. Started really when I wanted to learn myself how to work with 360 video, and I got a Ricoh Theta and played with it and was really excited about it, but wanted to have a little bit more of a professional approach and started looking around for resources and guides, and there really was so little available. And with my background in training and teaching and also, you know, filmmaking stuff in general, I thought it would be fun to see what I could come up with, and that eventually became this book. This session today is really going to be geared at sort of entry-level users. I'm not going to get into some of the more advanced stuff, although the book does. It starts at a beginning level, but it does get into some pretty cool advanced level stuff if you're interested in doing professional level productions as well. And I'm going to start with just some really basic concepts about how 360 works, not too much here. But, you know, fundamentally, when we're shooting 360 video, what we're doing is we're capturing video in many, many directions at once in a full sphere of video that is then translated into a file that you can work with. And this could be done using a very elaborate camera like this one here, or something as simple as the Theta V. And regardless of what camera you're using, the concept is very simple. You're creating video that can be viewed either on a smartphone by panning around or by lifting the phone and moving it around, or on a computer screen where you could, you know, pan the view so you could see different areas of the room, or look up or down and so forth, and so you can control it. And both of these are ways to view the content that allows you to see the full sphere, but it's when you go into the goggles, into an HMD, that you really get the true 360 experience. And it's a really different experience. If you're creating content, most people creating content probably hope that their viewers are going to be watching it as much as possible in this sort of environment, because this creates that really naturalistic experience where you genuinely do feel like you are in another place. And that is the goal of the sort of filmmaking work that I'm going to be talking about today, is really targeted towards people who are going for that maximum experience, viewing stuff in a headset like this, like the Google Daydream, or the new HTC. I forget actually the name of their new thing that they just announced this week. They have a cableless companion to the HTC Vive that lets you view content, or of course, a Gear 360, Gear VR. All of these headsets, even from the most simple to the most elaborate, are a big upgrade from watching stuff on a computer screen or a phone. And so, again, this is sort of the focus of this session, is to talk about stuff that's geared towards that HMD view. And one of the first things that I want to talk about is this idea of world building versus storytelling. And so if you're creating any video that you're shooting, you're typically going to be trying to communicate something to your audience. It may just be to share an experience that you had, or it may be to tell an elaborate narrative story, or it may be to capture a live event. Whatever the elements that you are trying to communicate. One of the differences when working in 360 is that it is really going to be much more about creating a world, because VR really does transport the viewer to this new space. And that means that you don't have as much control over where people are looking, and it means that whatever you build, the focus is going to be much more on that experience of being in a place, more so than following necessarily the narrative story that you're telling. Sometimes when you watch a movie or you read a review of a movie, somebody will say like the location in that movie was a really important character in the story. Well, in 360, the location is always a character, and in some ways it's always the leading character. And so no matter what else you've got going on, it's really important to focus on that decision of where you're going to put your camera, what you're going to see, and to think, of course, about what you're going to see in all directions. And that's going to limit some options of where you may choose to shoot or set up your camera. In terms of how the viewers experience your video, another really important decision that you need to make is this idea of what we call the participant or ghost. And this idea, basically, whether or not the people or the other elements in your 360 piece acknowledge the camera or not. And so if you let the other people in your video look at the camera, look directly at the lens, the viewer is going to really feel like they are a participant in the scene. They're going to really feel present. And it doesn't matter if it's narrative or nonfiction, you still have that option of whether or not you let people look into the lens, or try to avoid it, I guess, in a nonfiction setting. And both have an option. So if they don't look into the lens, the experience is often that you are this ghost. You're there in the scene, but no one seems to acknowledge you, and no one seems to realize you're there. And so both are viable options, and different types of content lend themselves to different options, to choosing one or the other. And in terms of thinking about how you do this, first of all, do you choose how people in the scene acknowledge the camera or not? And also, what happens if the viewer looks down, so to see where their body would be? Some of the more elaborate professional pieces that have been produced have very carefully built either CG or photographic bodies that sit below the camera, so that if the viewer does look down, they're not confused as to where they are in the scene. There's an actual body there. But of course, that comes with the drawback that if that body that you see doesn't correspond to your own body, that can be disorienting. So if, both in terms of, age and gender and things like that, but also just in terms of whether they're sitting or standing, and whether you, when you're watching, are sitting or standing. And, and just the position of where you are in a particular space versus where you are when you're watching the video. So you need to think about how to incorporate that element whether you just paint out the bottom and put a logo over where the tripod was, or whether you try to create a smooth seeming bottom, or whether you actually put a physical body down there. These are options that you need to consider in order to create a really fully immersive experience. Another really fundamental idea is this sense of where you position the camera. And so in VR, in 360, and maybe I'll just stop for a second and talk about that distinction in case anybody is bothered by my conflating the terms. You know, VR and 360 video are not synonymous. Shooting with a Ricoh Theta or another 360 camera is not giving you a full VR experience, because that full VR experience typically means that you can move around in the space. You've got the 6 degrees of freedom, so you can literally lift, go higher or lower, lift your head or crouch down. You can tilt and turn, and all of those things are really not possible with 360 video, where the camera is effectively in a fixed space, and sorry, I have a loud animal in my house, and the camera's in a fixed space, and the viewer can only choose to turn their head to see the different directions that are visible. And so when you think about where you put your camera, again, so we're talking about 360 video here, you need to pick a spot that can be seen, or that can see all of the areas in your environment that you want your viewer to see. Sorry, I'm just going to mute 1 second and come right back. I'm going to just...
Oh man, we heard mid-meow muting going on there. The cat always wants to get the attention.
It's like that great scene where the guy's on the news and the children come in running. Anyway, sorry about that. So thinking about where to put your camera is a really important aspect of how you choose to shoot your 360 scene. You want to put it in a place that can see most of the action in the scene, but you also need to think about how it's going to feel to the viewer. And so, there's this fundamental issue that the camera really represents the viewer's head. And this is why I have this image on the screen here. This is a classic shot that's done with traditional video all the time. It's called a hostess tray shot, where you put the camera outside of the car window to see the people inside. And you see this on TV all the time. You see it in movies, and you don't even notice it. You don't think, when you're looking at a shot that's shot this way, that the camera happens to be floating outside of the car. Well, with 360 video, that's not the experience. If you put a 360 camera out there, any viewer is naturally going to immediately look to their, in this case, to the left to see what's coming in front of them. They're going to look down to see what's going on in the road below them. They may be paying some attention to the character inside the car that you're hoping that they're looking at, but they're certainly not going to be oblivious of these other elements. And all rules are meant to be broken. There may be cases where it's a great idea to put this camera outside the window in 360, but you really need to understand that that is going to, the viewer is really going to experience that as if they are floating outside of the car. And so you need to think about if that's your intention. Another aspect is not to put the video, or the camera rather, because again, even though part of your action may be appropriately distanced from the camera and from the from the viewer when they're watching it, if they turn their head and there's a wall right up against them, or they're right up near the ceiling or some other obstacle, that's going to feel distracting. You're going to suddenly feel like, oh, there's this wall right here, but I don't actually have a wall next to me, and so that disconnection is going to potentially create disengagement and pull them out of the experience. And there's some people have a tendency to think, well, let's just stick the camera right in the middle of the room, but that doesn't work either. I skipped a point here. The objects are closer than they appear. This is when you are looking at video, when you're watching a 360 video, everything is fully naturalistic size. So you don't have the benefit of the zoom lenses and the wide angle lenses that you do in traditional video, and so you can't artificially distance or bring something close to the viewer. Everything is naturalistically sized, and so if the camera is 3 or 4 feet from a subject, which is what you would need to get a close-up view, somebody's going to need to stand very close to the camera in order to appear close enough that you can see the details of their face. Well, that's also going to make the viewer feel like somebody is standing 3 feet away from them or 2 feet away from them, which really starts to encroach into their personal space. And so and you will flinch when you're watching something if somebody walks right up to the camera, because it really feels like that person is right there in your space. And so you need to think about how that, in terms of that positioning relative to other people and other objects in the scene. And what I was going to say next is that another one here I added here, that it's very important that when you move the camera, you need to move it very cautiously, because moving cameras can work in 360, but it can also be very disorienting and can really cause nausea or just great discomfort, especially when viewing in a headset. And so while you may mount your camera to the top of a helmet and go skiing down a hill, and if there's stabilization and you watch that on a phone or a computer screen, that may be perfectly watchable and you can kind of look around as you're going down the hill. But if you try to watch that in a headset, it's going to be really, really uncomfortable. And so it's really not, if your goal is to create a very naturalistic, immersive experience, you want to be very careful with how you move the camera. You want to make sure that it's as stable as possible, and you want to make sure that the movement is consistent with the likely direction the viewer is looking. So if someone is looking, in this case whether it's on the side of the car there, if the camera is moving along with that car, that's going to be in parallel to the way that their head is faced if they're looking inside the car. That can create a real disorienting experience for a viewer. If you're moving and you're looking the direction you're going, that's a little less disorienting. But of course, you can't control where your viewer is looking. So, unless you've got a really clear focus of the shot that you can be pretty confident most of your viewers are going to be looking in a particular direction, you need to be really thoughtful with how you move the camera. And here's where I thought I was going a minute ago, this idea about where you position the camera, both in terms of height and position in the room. What I started to say before, I'll just pick up now. This idea that some people think that it's a good idea to stick the camera in the middle of the room, or in this example, like a little dinner scene, stick the camera in the middle of the table. And that's great in that you can, when viewing it, you can turn all directions and see see everything going on around you. But again, if you think about that camera as the person's head, suddenly they're going to feel like they are lying there on the middle of the dining table or in the middle of a room when everybody's sitting around them. It's a really odd place to put yourself. And so it's much more practical to put the camera in the position of a real-world viewer. And this also goes to this idea of camera height. It's really important to think about the height that you set your camera up. And it's the general rule is you want to set it up either at a natural standing height or a natural sitting height, and so that your viewer, when watching it, will be able to recognize the position that they're in. If you put the camera really high up or really close to the ground, that can again be very disorienting and very uncomfortable for a viewer to watch, and especially if you've got edits in your piece and you're cutting between different shots or different scenes, and you go from a shot that is at regular eye level to a shot that is very close to the ground. It may be a very cool looking angle, but that viewer is going to have a very unsettling experience when suddenly they feel like their head has been moved, thrown to the ground in this new location. So that camera height factor is really important. And again, the simplest and easiest rule of thumb is to imagine you've got a real person there in the scene, and where would they be sitting or standing, and position the camera that way. Excuse me. In terms of how you choose where to put the camera and what the shots you capture, again, this is a way in which the rules of traditional cinema really fall apart. And one of the things that I teach people is that if you're a experienced filmmaker, you really kind of need to throw out a lot of the things because a lot of your instincts will work against you. And that's because there is such a fundamental difference in the way we experience 360 video than the way we experience regular traditional flat video, or flatties as I like to call them. And, in traditional video, you've got all these different angles you can choose. You've got close-ups, you've got inserts of an important detail in a scene, you've got cutaways to action that's going on outside the scene, point of view shots or reaction shots, all of these ways that we use the camera to tell the story or to communicate the subject of the frame to the viewer. All of this goes away in 360, as well as the tools that we use of the camera, like the camera height that I described before, where creating a low angle or a high angle can create an emotional feeling. The focus of the camera is gone pretty much with 360. You've got deep focus, so everything is in focus all the time. You can't choose different focal lengths, so you can't create the zoomed in look or a wide angle look. None of those things are present, and of course, there's really no intra-scene editing to help you craft a performance. So, again, with traditional video, we often shoot multiple scenes of the same action and then edit it together to create the simplest, most effective version of the scene, compressing time sometimes, getting rid of a bad performance, or, even if it's a non-narrative, you're capturing a scene at a concert or a rally or some sort of event, you're going to want to be able to edit around to help compress the time and get rid of dead space and things. With 360, you can do some editing, and that could be the subject of a whole nother course perhaps, but generally editing is pretty tricky in 360, and so most projects people stick to having one or maybe two different angles in a scene and really running the whole scene from that particular time. So without these elements, how do we control the point of focus? How do we tell the viewer what it is that they're experiencing? And one of the best metaphors to use is to think about theater. In theater, a scene is run from its entirety, from the beginning of the scene to the end of the scene, and the viewer can choose, the person sitting in the audience can choose where they want to look at any given time. And so using that as a model for 360 is a really practical tool. It falls apart a little bit because, of course, in 360 usually the camera is a lot closer to the action than in a stage setting. And of course, there are some immersive theater projects where you really do walk on the stage and you walk among the actors in the scene, and that's a little bit closer to the 360 experience, but even that is still pretty different. But using the theater metaphor is a good one for a creator to think about how to guide your viewer's point of focus in your 360 scene. So for starters, blocking and choreography. Where the other people in the scene are going to be standing or walking, what other objects are going to be there. And again, this is all true for both fiction and nonfiction. It's a little bit easier to describe when I'm talking about a fiction scene where you can completely control every element, but all of these rules apply just as much for nonfiction. And in terms of, you think about where your subject is going to be relative to your camera, are they going to be moving? Is your camera going to be moving? How are those things going to interact? And as much as possible, you want to try to rehearse or practice the shot so that you have some sense of how well it's going to work. And again, another whole subject that I could talk about that's not part of this particular webinar is how we monitor the camera, where you stand when you monitor, what you're looking at when you're monitoring, and then that's another whole factor about how you get the best results from your footage. But again, another tool from the theater model is this idea of sound and lighting cues. Sound, and I'm going to come back and talk more about sound in a few minutes, but using spatialized sound is really critical to creating effective VR, especially for audiences who will be viewing it in a headset. It's really essential, and again, I'm going to talk more about that in some detail in a few minutes. But if you think about how you can use sound to control the viewers where they're paying attention, it's one of the strongest tools you have. If you're looking at a 360 scene and you hear a sound, you hear some crash or some, a gunshot, or you hear somebody yell from off to your left, you are always going to turn your head and look to see what it is that caused the sound. And that becomes a really, really critical tool for effective storytelling or communicating the subject to your audience in 360 video. And you can do similar things with lighting. If a light goes on in the periphery of your vision, it's going to draw your attention away from what you're looking at over to that area where the light went on. Or similarly, if a light goes off, if you're looking at a part of the frame and suddenly that area goes dark, somebody walks over and turns off a light, it's going to encourage you to turn your head and look for another area that you can see a subject. And if there's another area that's lit up in another part of the frame, or another part of the sphere, you're going to naturally change your point of focus to look at that. So all of these are ways that you can help guide your viewer's point of view. But ultimately, that last bullet point there is something you can't let go of. You're going to have to give up control of where they're going to look. You can't completely guide where somebody's going to look. And of course, this is one of the great things about 360, is that your viewers really can experience the piece on their own terms. Everybody will have a unique version of their experience because they will choose exactly where it is that they want to look and what they want to focus on. And you, as the creator, you need to accept that and sort of build your world so that no matter where they're looking, no matter what they're paying attention to, it's consistent with what you're trying to communicate. So when we talk about framing the shot, there's a whole idea of composition that, you know, in traditional flatties, we have a rectangle. We have a frame edge that we can use to guide the viewer's eye. And so in this little shot here, I've got the classic rule of thirds, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It's a great simple framing technique that if you imagine this grid projected on top of your image, you can sort of help guide the viewer from the edge of the frame or to the edge of the frame from that subject if it's on one of those quadrants. So here I've got this kid's eye right on that quadrant. That's going to pull your eye, and it's going to guide you to look in the direction that she's looking towards the left side of the frame there. And so with frame edges, all of the tools that we use, that's how we frame a shot. What's near the edge? What's close? Is the subject too close to the top? Is the subject, you know, too far from one edge or another? You know, are there distracting objects right around the edge of the frame? These are a lot of the things that we use to create composition in traditional film. All of this fades away in 360. In 360, you've got a limited point of focus, though, and we can use this point of focus to provide a rough framework that allows you to use some of those same rules for composition. And so that little chart at the above, that's showing just the natural view with your eyes of how far you can see one direction or the other. And, you know, so your peripheral vision is the widest area there, that large green line that goes all the way from one side to the other. But the area between the blue and the red, I have a cursor here, this area over here is your main focus of vision. And so that sort of is a little bit akin to what you see down here in the bottom. This is now showing you the limit of the particular headsets, depending on what you've got to work with. But, oops. I can't click on that. And you know, no matter how wide your field of view is, even if the headset allows you to see this 210 field of view, as some of the newer, fancier headsets are allowing, you're still going to be focused on primarily looking at this narrow area. And so with that narrow area, if you can kind of know what your subject is looking at, if you've got somebody talking, you've got an interview subject, or you've got, you know, a dancing dog, that's where the viewer's focus is going to be, and you can sort of assume that you've got a little bit of room to the left and the right of that and to the top and the bottom of that for where the edges of their current viewing area are. And so you can sort of use some of those basic rules from traditional composition if you kind of imagine that. And so, for example, if you've got a distracting object that's happening right over here at the edge of that viewable area, that's going to keep pulling your viewer's attention over to there. If you can avoid that, if you can make sure that if there's, you know, let's say there's an open window with cars going by outside, and that's happening right here, and you've got your interview subject here in the center, well, that's going to keep pulling the viewer's attention away. But if you can adjust your framing slightly so that that open window with the cars going by is back here, so that it's still, they can still see it if they turn and look, but it's not going to be distracting them while they're focused on your interview subject. So, like, you can use some of these rules by thinking about this limited field of view while you're watching. And you can use tools like creating a frame within the frame. So this is a lat long. This is showing you the whole 360 video image in one rectangle, but this is actually the sphere. You see, that's why it's distorted in these ways, right? This is, you know, the main focus of area is right here in the middle, and this window in the shot here, this little frame in the shot, creates a natural boundary so that your viewer will naturally keep their eyes looking in this area, unless you create some object over here on the side with a sound or with lighting or you know, with some other thing to pull their attention away. And so if you have a building or a room where you've got strong diagonal lines, you can help that to help guide points of focus. You know, that's another traditional rule of composition, that you can use like diagonal lines to guide the viewer's eyes towards the intended subject, things like that. Oh, that was the end of that one. Sorry. Okay. The next topic I've got is talking about spatialized sound, and I started to bring this up a few minutes ago. This is really, really one of the most important things you can do to create an immersive video experience. So the Ricoh actually just came out with this really cool 3D microphone that allows you to capture surround sound, and when you play it back, the viewer will be able to hear sounds naturally in this 360 environment. One of the nice things about this connecting to the Ricoh camera is that, by definition, the microphone and the camera are facing the same direction. If you use a standalone spatialized or ambisonic microphone, you need to keep track of the direction of where front is on that microphone, so that in the editing or when you're distributing it, you can ensure that the front of the video lines up with the front of the audio. Fortunately, with this particular device, you don't have that problem. It takes care of that for you. But so recording ambisonic audio, which is again this idea of like 3D sound, where you've got multiple microphones listening in every direction at once, that is one key element to creating a nice naturalistic environment. But the problem is these microphones, including this Rico one, all of these ambisonic microphones are not really optimized for picking up somebody's voice and getting a nice clear sound for a subject, be they an interview or an actor or whatever it is that you're trying to capture. And so that you'll typically record with a regular old mono mic, like a lavalier, like you could use a wireless lavalier mounted on your subject, or you could even use a planted mic. You can't really get away with a boom mic on a boom pole because, of course, if the viewer turns their head, they'll see the boom mic operator in the shot. So we can't really use those. But we can use wireless mics if you hide them, or plant mics where you've got a mic sitting at a table or somewhere where it's not obvious to be seen, but it'll create a good location to record good quality audio for the dialogue or for specific sound effects. If, for example, you had a screaming cat and you wanted to make sure that that was clearly heard, while the ambisonic mic will pick that up, it's going to be fairly limited in terms of the sound quality. Is going to be, the mic's going to be far away from the subject, presumably, and it's going to be limited in terms of dynamic range. And so by recording any specific key sounds using regular microphones, regular mono microphones, you can ensure that those sounds are going to be nicely high quality recordings. But it also requires that when you mix your audio, you use special software to position the sound so that it is locked to a particular place in the video. This is one example. This is a plugin from a company called Blue Ripple. Excuse me, and that allows you to literally put, to assign a sound to a particular place in your frame. And of course, you can move it if your subject is moving. You can create a little animation so that the sound follows them as they move around the shot. And so Blue Ripple is one tool. Facebook has a product called the 360 spatialized. I can't actually remember the name of their product right now. It used to be called Two Big Ears, and I think it's just called the Facebook audio tool, or the 360 audio tool from Facebook. It's free. It's a set of plugins for Pro Tools or for Logic or for other audio tools, and it allows you to do some of this spatialized panning and to output the right format so that your finished video will have that spatialized sound embedded in it. Now, I know this sounds a little complicated, and it is a little bit complicated, but it is well worth it, in that it is probably the single most important thing you can do to create an immersive experience. And so by the combination of that ambisonic microphone that's recorded from the location where your camera was, so that all of the ambience and all of the background noise is appropriately spatialized, so it's in the right direction, and then adding into that mono mics, the sound from your mono mics for any talking or any sound effects or anything like that, you can create a really, really cool, immersive soundscape, and that is, almost more important than the video in a lot of ways to create a fully immersive experience. Okay, a few things left. I'll try and speed up a little bit here. Talking about the center point. This is something that, when you shoot a shot, you typically think, oh, this is probably going to be the center of the frame, but there's no reason you can't change that center when you in the editing room before you release it to the world. So of course, if you're live streaming, you don't have this luxury. But if you're going to be finishing or doing any editing in your footage to prepare it for release, you have the option to adjust the center point of the frame, and different parts of a frame can really seem like totally different shots. So here we've got this shot from this restaurant. By putting the focus on the upper image there, the bartender who's working, then again, you're looking at the lat long. So you're looking at the entire 360 image there, the entire sphere all at once. And you can see that that bartender is right there in the center of the frame. And I know he seems small when you look at the lat long, but if you were looking at this through the headset, that person would look naturally close to you, and they would look a natural focus of your shot. And then this guy picking up that wine bottle there, he's off to the right. You might notice him if you turned your head and looked, but it's not going to be the first thing that you see. On the other hand, if you adjust that center point so that that guy picking up the wine bottle is the focus of your shot, that's what you're going to be looking at. The bartender is now off to the left. You're not necessarily going to notice him unless you unless you turn your head. And in fact, what happens in this shot is that this guy picks up that bottle and then he walks off to the right, and that's going to naturally lead your eye off to one side. And that leads to this important point that you need to think about what is the center point of your image, and what are going to be the things around the periphery, and how much are you asking your viewer to look all the way around, to turn around, look over their shoulder. In the real world, we rarely look directly behind us. Only if something really startles us, a sound occurs behind us or somebody taps you on the shoulder, then you're going to turn, you're going to flip your head all the way around. But it's generally not very comfortable to turn your head all the way around, right? Our necks are not really designed for that. And so if you create a 360 environment that has stuff going on right behind you all the time, has stuff going on in all directions, you're going to force your viewer to be twisting their neck around, and it can be very uncomfortable. And so you want to limit where your action is. You want to create an environment where it feels natural and where there is action going on in different places, but you don't want it to be happening in a way that's going to cause them to turn their head so much. When you're editing footage, you need to think about where people turn their head during the frame. And so, for example, this is three shots, 3 different locations, and we've got these people walking. In the first shot, that red line shows you their starting point, and then they walk over towards the left, right? And so in the second frame, I have my mouse up here. Here, now this is the original first frame. At the end of the shot, they've walked over to here. So your viewers turn their head over to here. Well, when you make the edit for the next shot, you want to make sure that the subject of the shot is here, not over here, because they'd have to turn their head back and they're going to miss what's going on. So in this shot now, they start over here and then they walk this way. Oops. They walk this way so that they wind up over here. And then this is, again, that original shot of where they started. Now your viewer's looking almost all the way over their left shoulder, and then at the next shot you start them, they're going to have to keep looking all the way over the left shoulder to see the subject of the shot, even though the center is way back over here. So this is demonstrating that there's a problem that if you have these scenes like these, and these are very simple scenes where there's one clear point of focus, the viewer is going to naturally be turning their head and turning their head as these scenes go on. Well, if you wanted to fix that, you can start by moving the first shot back. So now the first shot starts a little bit further to the right, but by the time they walk to the end of that shot, they're now only in the middle, which means when we pick up over here and they start walking, they only go a little bit further to the left, and then by the time you get to that third shot, they're only a little bit to the left. And so just going back and forth, here's the first set, here's the second set, right? You see that all I did was move that center point of each of these shots so that we keep our viewer looking straight ahead as much as possible instead of winding up with stuff all the way over their neck. A couple more quick little things that you can do to really enhance your video is things like titles and graphics. And the thing is, though, you can't just slap titles on in a program like Final Cut Pro or Premiere. You need to really be sure to use extra. There are 360 plugins, or now they're built into Adobe Premiere, and allegedly will be very soon built into Final Cut Pro. But even still, within those programs, you need to make sure you're using the right 360 tools. This is an example of just putting a regular title onto this 360 video, but when you view it in the headset, you see it's giant and it's also distorted. If instead you use the 360 Aware software, when you slap that title on, it looks really tiny in the lat long, but when you view it in the headset, it looks like a nice normal size and it's not distorted. And so it's really important when you're adding titles or graphics or any other elements to your shot that you use special software that will ensure that those graphics are mapped onto your 360 video properly. And similarly with transitions. So if you just put a regular transition, like this is an iris wipe, this circle, you would zoom in from one shot to the next. Well, what'll happen here is that the edge of the frame, your edge of your circle is going to have a cutoff. It's not wrapping around. This is if you use just a regular old transition effect. It's also because it is round in the viewer in your editing program, when you view it in the 360, it's going to be distorted. And so instead, you want to use special 360 transitions built into Premiere. This is not available in Final Cut as far as I know. And there are a bunch of these transitions, just to go back a second, that automatically distort the video, I mean the shape of the transition. They wrap around to the edge so that it'll look, you know, if you turn your head, you're going to see that edge there. You're going to see it's going to look like a normal circle, even though in your editing viewer it's going to look like in this distorted shape. And here are a few of these sample transitions that are available. This is all built into Adobe Premiere in the 2008 CC version. It's just released. They were previously from this company called Metal that Adobe recently bought. And so those are just some cool kinds of transitions that you can create in your 360 video to, you know, enhance things and make them a little bit more fun. So there's a very quick and elaborate list of 9 things you can do to make your 360 video really more exciting and more fun. And I know it's a lot of information, and I covered a lot of pieces. We can review any of that now in the questions. And you know, if obviously anything you want me to elaborate on or go in more detail on, I'm more than happy to.
That's great. Thanks so much, Michael. That's wow, really quite a bit of stuff. I'm starting to feel better that maybe I don't have a background in regular video production in the flatties. And,
well, and the good news is, of course, with this webinar, I presume you're going to be able to watch it again later, right? This is not a one-time viewing.
Exactly. Yep. We'll provide both the slides and the recording to everyone through email after the webinar is over.
Great.
So okay, we're going to jump into questions. Everyone, if you haven't already, please type in your questions. You've got the question window off to the right, I think. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible. We've got quite a few already. Let's see, I'm sorting through. From Edgar, he said, I would appreciate hearing your thoughts on 180-degree VR content.
Yeah, you know, I'm a big fan of that, actually, or what some people are doing is like 270 degrees, where you basically shoot. You may shoot with a special camera that's shooting 270 or 240. You know, 180 is a little bit narrow. You know, in the idea that, again, I'm really focused on people viewing stuff in headsets. If you're viewing stuff on a computer screen or a phone, it's less critical. And with 180, sometimes what people do is they just double it so that if you turn around, you can see just a duplicate of the same thing. But I think that working with limited field of view like that, like not doing the full 360, is actually really helpful as a storyteller, because it means that, first of all, you don't have that problem of people trying to turn all the way over their shoulder. There's enough peripheral vision, like the video is bigger than what you can see, so that you really do feel like you're present, and you can tilt your head a little bit to the side, to one side or the other, to see a little bit more of the scene, but you're not looking all the way behind you. And the advantage is, by shooting in that limited field of view, therefore, from a production standpoint, it's an enormous benefit, because, first of all, you don't have to hide the crew, right? You can use lighting. There can be a light there behind the camera, or, you know, off to the side, as long as it's not in the frame, that you can use to improve the quality of your shot. You can use, you know, again, the director or the producer can be standing there, right there on set behind the camera, seeing what's going on, talking to the talent. If you've got an interview set up, you can just talk to the subject of the interview there without worrying about trying to hide yourself. So I'm a really big fan of that limited field of view. I think that the bang for the buck with that is really great. And one more benefit of that is that the file sizes are smaller, because you're now dealing with, well, either the file sizes are smaller or the quality's better, depending on how you compress your video. But because you're dealing with less video, you know, it's a smaller sphere you're trying to cover, you can use less data to represent it. So that means you can either have higher quality, or you can have smaller files. So there's a lot of advantages to that. There's not a lot of cameras or technology that are focused on that specifically. And again, you can do 180 with a camera like the Theta or some of these, but I don't actually think 180 is enough. I don't think that solves the problem enough. Then you really are aware of the edges, and I think that defeats some of the benefit.
All right, awesome. Here's another one talking about field of view. This is from Christopher. Could you shoot a 360 video but reduce the field of view to 270 in post?
Yes, and that's generally the way I've seen people doing it. I mean, I know somebody was using a custom camera that they built. You know, it's basically like a three-camera rig where they're focused, where they're not capturing the behind them. But yeah, one of the things that you can easily do is shoot the 360 and then just trim it, basically crop it in a way in post. It's just the problem is for distribution, you need to be paying attention to that. It's a little bit tricky. You're pretty much going to need a special dedicated app to display it properly. So if you otherwise you just black out that back area, which somewhat again it helps with limiting where people are looking, but it doesn't necessarily save you any of that quality that I was talking about.
Okay, cool. Here's one with editing, so maybe similar to the post-production stuff from Aurelius. If you were to buy or learn, just one video software for 360, would it be Adobe Premiere? Basically, is there a clear choice, or are there lots of pluses and minuses for all the different things?
The market is pretty immature. Premiere is definitely the leader right now. If you like Premiere, then that's great. If you generally don't like Premiere and you don't want to have to use it, it's right now it's the market leader, and not just Premiere, but it's a combination of Premiere and After Effects. That's really what people are using. And of course, we didn't talk at all about manual stitching, but that's a whole factor as well. Learning AutoPanel Pro or AutoPanel Video Pro rather, which is the stitching software from GoPro, and some other tools for doing some of the other special effects work that you may want to do. Apple has demonstrated they had a conference a few weeks ago where they demonstrated some 360 features in the new version of Final Cut Studio, or Final Cut Pro rather, and that is promising. There's a lot of cool features that they're showing, but it's not clear. I can't say yet if it's going to compete with Premiere, if it's going to match it. I don't know if it's going to match it feature for feature or not. That might enable Final Cut Pro users to do. Certainly, it'll help for some things, or probably for some of the basic things. And then, of course, there are other standalone programs like from Boris, or there's several that are other tools that are available. But I think right now, Premiere is sort of leading the way, and largely because of that acquisition of Metal, because the Metal plugins have been sort of the industry standard for the last couple of years.
All right, we have another editing question. This is from Andrew. What tips do you have for editing on an iPad?
I don't know how you would do it, frankly. I mean, in terms of editing, I guess I don't know what software you'd be using on an iPad. And in terms of editing, the process for editing 360. First of all, there's just choosing your takes, right? If you shoot something multiple times, you're probably going to pick one and get rid of the others, and that I'm sure you can do in editing. You can do that in any tool, because it's just about which you include and which you exclude. But I don't know if there is any iPad editing software that is 360 aware. So once you get into manipulating the footage in terms of moving the center point, or wanting to paint out the tripod, or wanting to add titles or anything like that, I don't know if there's any software available for it. The other thing is that 360 footage is generally pretty data heavy. These are pretty big files, and I guess again maybe most of the people here are using Thetas, and maybe those files are not so bad. But if you're using some of the bigger cameras or more professional gear, the files are pretty massive, and so that limits again. I think few people are trying to do that stuff on tablets, but I may be wrong. There may be tools I'm unaware of. That's my knowledge.
There's just a comment here from Mike saying Veer VR, the Veer VR app is supposed to edit 360 videos, might work with iPad.
Cool. There you go. Yeah, I didn't know about that, but that very well may be a great tool for that.
All right, I like that little crowdsourcing during the webinar. How about sound? We've got a question from Mike. Any advice for budget ambisonic mics to use with the Theta S? I guess he's specific with the Theta S.
There is a Zoom. Zoom makes these little audio recorders, and I have to look it up, and I can't do it right this second. But there is a Zoom recorder that I think is like $200, and you can use it to capture 360 sound, or it's not true ambisonic sound, but it's effectively ambisonic sound. And I think that is the cheapest option. If you just probably type Zoom Amazonic into Google, you'll come up with it pretty quickly. It was announced about a year ago, or maybe in February or March of this year. They released it was basically an existing recorder that they gave a software update for that enabled it to record this Amazonic type sound, and that's probably the cheapest thing available. There are a number of other mics, but actually the thing I would recommend for a lot of people is consider renting. Especially, and it depends on what market you're in, excuse me, but if you've got access to any sort of professional gear, and there are like online rental places like Lens Rentals, I think, or there are a few places that'll mail stuff to you. Rental prices can be shockingly cheap, and especially for things like a microphone, where like the microphone normally costs $1,000 or $1,500, you might be able to rent it for $15 a day, or something, really minimal, and then you basically are getting you're not getting the cheap version, you're getting the pro version, but you're getting it without spending a ton of money. And so I'm a big fan of recommending rental equipment, especially for technologies that are changing rapidly, because if you buy the technology, it could be obsolete in 6 months, but if you rent it, that's the rental house's problem.
That's cool. We had a couple people jump in. The Zoom H2N,
Yes,
I think, was the one
thank you so much.
Yeah,
I can't open my web search while I have the screen up here. But yeah,
thanks to both John and Bob jumped up with that. That's great.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
I love it. Okay, there was one in here from Jason. What do you think of the Theta V or Theta as a tool to make indie level shorts?
The truth is I have not yet played with the Theta V, so I can't speak to it exactly, but I can say that I am a little skeptical in that, even 4K resolution is not really enough for stuff to look really high quality. And it's functional, and here's what I would say is that I strongly recommend getting a camera like the Theta V or something inexpensive that you can go out and shoot a lot, because I think there's a lot of trial and error that really can improve your craft just by going out and shooting simple things, just playing with it, getting more comfortable with things like where you put the camera, things like the camera height, things like if you're going to do any editing, how you approach that content. And so I think by learning without spending a lot of money on the gear and working with something like the Theta, where basically the stitching is a non-issue, right? I mean, it's not always 100% perfect, but it's pretty good all the time, most of the time, and as long as you keep your action right off the stitch line there, you can get away with it. It allows you to really learn the craft of telling a story in 360 without a lot of the hassle. But the problem is when you have even a 4K image, when that gets stretched around a sphere, the visual quality begins to degrade pretty quickly. And if you look at the stuff, the more professional content that's been coming out that's shot with something like the Jaunt or the Yi Halo, the new Google camera, they're so much higher resolution. You're coming in at like a 12K master or an 8K master or even bigger, that are being then compressed, or they're being mapped down to a smaller file size for distribution, but because the raw footage is so much higher quality, you're getting a much better result. And of course, the other thing I'm not talking about here that I'm realizing is relevant is stereo. The Theta V is mono, and for really immersive content, I think stereo is really important. The difference between sticking your head inside of a globe and looking around at the inside of the globe, which is really cool, is what mono is. But now imagine you stick your head inside of the globe, but the globe is three-dimensional. And so some objects are close to you, some objects are far away from you. It's so much more, it's a subtle difference that makes all the difference in the world. And so, learning on a mono camera is really, really great for stuff that is, if you want that full immersive experience, I think working with stereo is really is worth the effort, at least depending on your subject. There may be some things where I'm wrong about that. I'm sure there's places where you can do amazing stuff in mono. But I think that when you get the stereo and it's working well, it's a real benefit.
All right, from Eric, this is sort of in the same direction. What are some examples of great 360-degree content? Movies, short films, marketing campaigns?
Yes, I wish I had it more. I was more prepared for that. There is some really cool stuff that I've seen. I think that specifically from 360 video, the stuff from Weaver, WEVR. Weaver has some pretty cool content. Some of their stuff is animated, but they also have some 360 video stuff that's really nice. If you go to the Jaunt app, not all that stuff is shot on the Jaunt. Jaunt has a distribution platform that is they're using to promote some of the stuff that's shot with the Jaunt, but but they have stuff on there that's shot with other cameras, and that's really cool too. I'm gonna ask another question. I'm gonna just try and pull up a couple titles real quick.
Okay, okay. Let's see. There was you were talking about working with sound. There were some sound questions, and some of the differences between, VR versus 360. Here's a question from John saying, surround video may be 2D or 3D. VR has immersion, and therefore it has to be in stereoscopic 3D. Do you shoot true VR? Actually, I'm sorry, I don't totally understand the question myself. Do you get that, Mike?
Well, I mean, it goes a little bit to what I was trying to bring up earlier in the webinar about that 360 video is not true VR.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. True VR requires the ability to move around in the space, and so that and right now there is nothing that is shot in 360 video that is true VR. There are things that are combining some video elements into an animated scene. There's an exhibit and talk about some of the best VR or the best 360 style video that I have ever seen is this piece that actually just won an Academy Award by Alejandro Inarritu called Carne Arena. It's a piece. It's a museum piece. It's here in LA right now, but it's traveling around the country and maybe around the world. It's a piece about migrants crossing the border into the U.S. and you are standing. You're there in the field or in the desert with these people. This group of migrants, and then a border patrol comes and harasses you all, and it is deeply moving. It's really, really impressive. It's absolutely the best example of this sort of content that I've seen. But I'm pretty sure that it is 100% CG. It's photorealistic. The people look completely realistic. Everything's naturalistic. The environment is realistic, and they probably used a combination of 360 video and CG, but it's full true VR. You can walk around in the space, and in fact, when you go to the exhibit at the museum, you're walking around in a field or in a big giant room where the ground is sand, and you feel like you're walking around in this desert environment. And anyway, it's a really, really cool, and that's real VR. 360 video is never VR. Stereo 360 helps. Having I'm forgetting the phrase right now, but being able to do the 6 degrees of freedom, where like capturing the depth data, so again on some of the new Google cameras, they can capture the depth data so that you can map, excuse me, you can map your 360 video into a CG environment, and so you can have an actor walk around in a CG environment, and it looks like, and you can get a lot more movement. And so again, you can lean around. I don't think you can get up and walk around because it was still shot from a camera that was, the camera was in one position in the room, so you can't turn yourself around. But it improves the experience and gives you a much more realistic experience. I think that that's going to become more and more common. I don't know of any consumer level cameras that are incorporating that, but I imagine in another year or two we will start to see that because the technology is clearly defined at this point. There's a piece called Immerse, IMMERSE, and this was a collaboration with Google and this company called Lightsail VR, and that was a really moving, beautiful. It's a series of portraits. And that was one in terms of somebody asked about good VR, good 360 video content. That's true 360, and that's a really great piece. I'm trying to remember some others, but of course, on the spot, I can never think of them.
All right, Mike. Well, we've come to the top of the hour, so I think we'll finish up with questions. Just to remind everyone, we're picking 5 winners from everyone who attended today. We'll be picking those randomly and sending you emails by the end of the day, and you'll get an e-copy of Mike's book, which now after this webinar, I kind of want one myself. Michael, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for participating. Have a very nice 360-degree day.
Indeed. Thank you guys all for attending, and I hope you all go out and shoot great video. Take care.